One of my favorite cartoons shows a manager at his office desk, and he's seated in front of a packed bookshelf filled with, and maybe some of you have seen this, filled with titles such as Management by Objectives and Leadership Empowerment and Progressive Project Implementation, all these fancy titles. But the cover of the book that he is intently reading is called Just Do Your Frickin' Job. That's literally the title of the book that he's reading. So my question to you, Karen, isn't all this employee experience stuff, not to mention employee satisfaction and employee engagement and all the rest of it, isn't it simply a distraction from the simple expectation that people just indeed do their freaking jobs?
Well, starting off on that optimistic note, Mike, right? I want to first thank everyone for being here today, and it's a real pleasure joining you with this, impressive team. I think to be real, and I think one thing I've learned in the last few months with pandemic hitting us all is that let's just get to the point. We've all been there. If we're being honest as leaders, I think even the best of folks have been to a point where they really want to grab that book and say, just do your job, right? There's so many complications that people are dealing with these days, and that was even before pandemic. But I will say that experience is something that I'm very focused on in my current work. I happen to work for a leading provider of background screening globally, Sterling. And it would be very easy to fall into the trap of allowing that human emotion to get the best of me or anyone that I come across that is struggling with the same issue, which is, how do I get beyond thinking about put your head down and just get the work done, and let's not worry about how everybody feels. Unfortunately, that's sort of the backwards way of what really is going on in the world, is that experience does matter. There's something that I've seen where if you look at Gallup a poll that just came out in October, there were over 100,000 companies that were surveyed. And what they found was that the experience, specifically the engagement associated with the experience, is driving tremendous recovery and tremendous resilience among folks that are actually focused on this work. I know that in our company, we have a picture of the cat in front of the mirror with the lion that they're looking back at going, we want you to feel this fierce, that you feel empowered to do everything you can to make the experience of sometimes disappointing news still something that we're here with you, and that empathy is that common denominator, that we hear you, we understand you could choose anyone, we could understand you could work anywhere. Depending on your circumstances right now, it could be a little more challenging, but the reality is that talent is precious. The investment you make in talent means that the experience of the employee, as well as the experience of the customer, and the ripple effect of those customers, means you have to be fierce. And fierce means you have to understand that experience and be able to put the I in experience. And if you don't have great leadership to drive that home and understand that what you're dealing with will be impacting the client experience, so you have to start with employee experience and work your way out.
So to piggyback on that thought, Matt, how do you define employee experience? And not to be too cynical here, but is it more than just providing decent coffee in the break room and maybe a ping pong table or two? That's sort of what some folks think of as the employee experience. I imagine on the heels of what Karen just shared with us, it's something quite different. Can you share your perspective with us?
Sure, and I know that's like the term du jour that's kind of taken over for employee engagement, but they're kind of part and parcel in a certain degree. So now look at employee engagement. There's probably 100 different definitions, but it's really where the heart and minds of the employee is, they're aligned with the goals and kind of mission of the organization, where employee experience is really all those things that factor into that. So yes, you can have a break room and have snacks and all the other things, but again, that's getting pretty, I think that's something that's become almost a side joke now, about all that. I don't think that's really, that's not even really looking at table stakes for things. So it's really, it could be everything from the environment of your office space, setting up collaborative environments, setting up environments where, whether it's open space or having, individual offices, everything from just how you can communicate the transparency to leaders and managers where they have their offices, and everything in between. So it's really anything that, kind of touches from a physical and kind of figurative standpoint of the relationship with the organization, the stakeholders, and the employees together. So all those things factor into that. So there's a lot of kind of minutia stuff that goes into that. But, again, if it's important to the employees, then that's an important part of employee experience.
Thanks, Matt. And I would imagine, Craig, at your organization, Penn Medicine, it's such a unique working environment. How does employee experience play out in that milieu? What does it look like in that context?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Hey, good morning, everybody. I think sometimes it's things that you would consider be systemic, which would be how do you onboard employees? Or is there a way that actually that employees, from the point of their initial application until they receive an offer, feel like that they are treated well and respectfully in the process, to the point that I think one of the most critical periods is the point between getting the offer and starting your first day. So how do you actually make sure that employee is fully communicated with, particularly for us? We can talk later about this in the pandemic. We have employees who are interviewing, who've never set a foot on the property, and we're making them an offer based upon a video interview. So all those pieces together, I think, in terms of interview, onboarding, what's your first month like? Do you feel like that you're really understanding mission, vision, and values of the organization? And one of the things that Matt touched on also is that we have a definition of what we call our Penn Medicine experience. And one part of that is that it's an enduring connection. So I think that's something that we need to all factor in. Now, enduring doesn't mean that you're going to start when you're 22 and retire when you're 65, and you'll stay with us for 44 years. I mean, that's 43 years. But we think enduring would be that you see that during your period of time that there are pieces of the puzzle that fit together. And my responsibility also falls under the patient experience. So we use the same kind of metric and measurement too, is that we really know that there's that intersection that we want our patients to have an enduring experience, that we want people to come back and feel like this is the place for them. I worked in a hotel a long time ago when I was in college, which was a resort hotel, which has since closed. And one of the, kind of the backdrop philosophy was like, get them here once. It doesn't mean they don't have to come back. We'll get them there once because we'll get their money. Things will be okay. That we don't have to come back. That was a very bad philosophy. But we want to figure out for employees, particularly also in healthcare, we have employees that will work for us. Imagine a nurse who works for us and she comes in from right out of college and she works for us for, 7 years, gets a master's degree, starts a family, moves to the suburbs, coming to a city hospital no longer is the best fit for her. She might step away for a couple of years and work in a community hospital, or step away and not work for a bit. And we have this incredible rebound, particularly in the clinical area, people that say, I've done what I want to do personally. Now I want to come back and work for you again. And I think that's part of what I think falls under for us with the experience, be somebody would leave in a good way and feel like they'd want to come back once the time is right.
Thank you, Craig. So now that we have a sense of how our panelists are sort of conceptualizing employee experience, Karen, let me ask you, in preparing for this panel event, I learned that, measuring employee experience is actually reaching a high level of sophistication at many companies. And that in addition, these companies are being held accountable to measure and report on progress in this area. I understand that Merck, for example, is proactively reporting employee experience metrics to their stakeholders. And, they're not alone in doing that. So in your perspective, how do you hold leaders accountable for the employee experience in a meaningful way? I can see someone thinking it's sort of a nebulous concept. How do you get your arms around that to measure it in a meaningful way?
Sure, and it is beyond an air hug, right? It's really getting your hands engaged in a way that will help people see what you're shaping as far as what's the great big picture look like, what does success look like, and I think that's a critical piece of leadership 101 when you're dealing with this topic. I will tell you that where I work now, we've approached it as it goes right into whatever form of a performance review you all do. There should be, whether it's monthly, quarterly, if you're still doing a standard annual, that it starts with setting those goals up so that everybody can see, and we have it woven into our core values that the client always matters, people first. Those are just two examples of our core values that we ask people to give examples of continuously, and that leaders reinforce it continuously. We have something called cultural crusaders that we recognize people on a regular basis to represent those values. And then more importantly, baseline metrics. How are you measuring, engaging the experience, the satisfaction of people that you're coming in contact with, both internally and externally, and sharing those results and having, much like when things go wrong, in some ways celebrating the mistakes. I want to be careful how I say that because I'm not saying that we want to screw up, but the reality is we're human. And so I guess maybe because I'm the human in human resources, I go, okay, so what did we learn? And just like any surgery out there, if something goes wrong, they go through it afterwards. It's the same with experiences. Let's learn from that, and let's share that information in a reasonable way that people can use that as a baseline progressive step of, okay, let's try to move forward from that. I think the biggest thought I have on this though is that leadership has to lead by example. You have to show the courage. You have to understand that for some people, when you say engagement, it may mean enragement at first, no pun intended, but the idea is that people get fed up if they think that you're breathing on them and trying to complicate their work versus simplifying it. So leadership has to show by example and by simple metrics, baseline, easy to quantify, satisfaction scores, pulse checks. Don't make it such a huge thing that you only talk about once a year, and make sure that leadership tells you, hey, here's how I'm showing it. How can I help you show it?
Thanks, Karen. And of course, Matt Cravity is sort of in the business of measuring employee experience, right? So share a little bit about your perspective on that question. How do we, I think Karen had more of a qualitative approach, and perhaps you have a more quantitative approach, given the work that you do at Cravity. Would that be a fair statement?
Sure. Now, Karen touched on some of the things that I think are absolutely necessary for the fact that for senior leadership in the C-suite to really not only buy in, but to champion, they really need to champion these causes. And then I would say causes, really, the business case needs to be created. And the only way a business case can be created to bring up to the C-suite is the fact that you're actually measuring quantifiably some of these factors. And so, part of the problem with engagement and the kind of fluffiness of job satisfaction, other metrics, that it's not as actionable as it needs to be. And so I'm not going to get into commercial about Cravity, but one of the tools we have is it measures intrinsic motivation. So it actually quantifiably measures motivation of your workforce, and from different segments and populations and such, and different demographics. But it shows exactly what your people want and what they're getting, and that delta, that gap, is where an organization can lean in and say, hey, people are saying, maybe our value state that we're collaborative and innovative, but boy, our people are telling us across the board systemically that they're not feeling that they're getting that in our organization. So that's step one. That's a foundational, but then it leads to what are the actions you can do to create, the behavior change and some of the things that people feel like there's, they're being listened to and there's a sense of purpose in their work. But again, everything needs to be actionable, and it has to be driven from the top of the organization, but then has to be communicated to properly to the frontline managers so they can lead their folks. And it's one of those things where you're not necessarily doing as much of changing the people as you are changing the environment. And that's a really key factor for all of this to have an effect in the future, because I think we've been looking at it for the last X amount of decades, where we, all the self-help gurus and everything talk about, if you're the charismatic leader, you can get your people to run through brick walls for you. Well, isn't it much easier to open the door or take the bricks away for them to walk through, right? So it's understanding those environmental factors. It might sound, sexy and like you're more actionable for a leader to be able to get them to do stuff, but it's really saying, hey, what do our people want, and what are they motivated by, and what's driving them, and what's important, and let's provide that to them. Let's kind of get out of our own way and let them almost create a situation where they're motivating themselves. And that's a much easier proposition. And, as of, recently, it's been a very esoteric, like you said, it's a little bit, one of those things that it's kind of amorphous. So how do you do that? Well, there are tools, not just ours, but there are tools now that you can actually quantifiably measure and track that over time in order to formulate that ROI for those key performance indicators like turnover intentions and engagement and productivity. So until that's really done and you bring that business case to the C-suite, they're still going to look at this as a checkbox to do your Gallup Q12 or whatever engagement survey you're doing, get on the best places to work list, which doesn't mean anything if your employees, that's great for the company, quarterly report and putting on the website, but it's not necessarily great for current employees or future employees that are going to be, living the experience if it's not genuine. So
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah,
go ahead, Karen.
May I add one thing?
Please.
And I don't want to take time away from Craig, but I wanted to just throw in something that really is critical from what I've seen, is that the survey work or whatever assessment you're using, Matt, you bring up great points about what you should be looking for. But I will tell you that basic human need right now will trump anything that is considered a nice to have or nice to do or nice to get to from a metric standpoint. If people, and this will show up in if you do anything that has to do with safety and trust of organization, if people are displaced, if people are struggling to feed family, if people are struggling with basic needs right now, whether they're underemployed or displaced because they used to go to a workplace and right now don't have a great home situation or alternative work site for them to work, you're going to be starting off at a very big deficit from getting people to do 110, 150, or even 75%, not because they don't want to, but the logistics of their environment. So I think there's something to be said about metrics should help you solve problems or see how you did solve problems. And I would start with, do you know your baseline employee situation or even your client situation so that you aren't coming at them with what I would call in other times reasonable options or reasonable solutions that right now they can't even entertain.
That's a great point. So thank you to both of you. So Craig, in light of the existence of these, sophisticated instruments to measure this stuff and, a growing awareness of the importance of this concept of employee experience and experts like you actually, chipping away at this every day. It's interesting. I read a statistic recently that said about $1 billion or so is spent every year on employee engagement programs, including surveys and the like. Yet studies suggest that only about 15% or so of employees globally and about 33% of US employees are actually engaged at work. And I think that's a pretty stark discrepancy. I'm curious, given your work and your role at Penn Medicine, to what do you attribute that?
Hopefully, I just got an unstable note on my internet. You know me, okay?
Yeah.
That scary thing said my connection was unstable. Yeah, and it's funny. I'll give you a quick synopsis around this year, because working in healthcare, you can imagine in February and March, business changed for us, and people stopped coming for elective procedures and started coming, for COVID. And at the same time, we were planning we have a employee experience event every October that typically has a giveaway, which is a systemic spend of probably about $1 million. Just something, it could be a lunch bag, it could be a hat and scarf. And we knew it was going to be tough financially, and our senior team and I talked about the more they talk to me than I talk to them, but saying, hey, this may not be the best financial move if we're on a very tight margin in healthcare. So we decided to suspend our giveaway for this year and notified through some communication. And that has not been negatively received at all. And because also we had a lot of gifts from our community during healthcare crisis. People were coming and giving lots of food and things like that too. But my point being, I think sometimes we actually rely a lot of times on like the stuff in terms of, gee, if we don't give somebody a hat this year that's worth $9, they're going to be disappointed about. So I think to Karen's point is that what we're hoping to provide is, we do our best as an organization to provide stable employment, which I think is much more of an engagement activity than a hat or a lunchbox. But all those things included, I think, help us provide really for the employees, that those touch points of experience that are less stuff. And I think also Matt raised a good point around, like take the bricks away at the door for our workforce, which is highly dispersed and across the Delaware Valley region, is that it's understanding kind of for the manager, like what's the engagement tool for their employee. And it's not so much for us. I mean, here's another dilemma that we face here is that we're probably a highly sought after employer in Philadelphia. So I think sometimes we get a little bit cocky about that, meaning like, oh, people want to come work at Penn Medicine because we're hopefully the best in the region. But if we don't provide for them all of those same tools and resources to be successful in their job, then we're going to be no better than anybody else. So part of what is it, I think, not resting on your laurels of who you are and really always trying to find mechanisms to improve the experience for employees. And then that's the same point is that measurement for us. I think in our last survey, I think we were in the low 50s for that engaged category, which certainly doesn't sound perfect, does it? So we look at that data and trying to figure out what can we do, but then looking at the national average, like any other, and I'm a data guy by trade, is we're doing better than the national average, but can we ask ourselves the question then, can we ever be at 75% engaged or 85% engaged, or is it truly some people that just always feel like on a 1 through 5 scale, they're always going to be a 4?
Yeah. Karen, Matt, did you want to piggyback on Craig's comments around that statistic and this discrepancy between all the money and effort being expended on employee engagement and the fact that these numbers are somewhat unexpectedly low, perhaps? Karen?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Real quickly, I would just want to say that, Craig, I applaud the idea that sending something branded as a thanks is a mixed bag right now, right? I think the message that we should be sending is what is really a question. I think Blanchard said it best, and he said, the idea is to influence, not to be an authority. So many times with engagement, we tell the employees what they want instead of asking and then actually responding in a way that feels more like a collaborative effort to say, what would you really benefit from more? Is it a food drive? Is it a resume review? If you're in the unfortunate situation where you are doing some transfer of staff, is it seeking new job opportunities within? Are you interested in moving to a different role because your role may be in jeopardy? Is it more of a, hey, we might actually benefit from relocation right now because of the fact that most of us are working remote. If you're, I have been in healthcare, so I know that's not always as easy to do, but reality is that ask the question and then listen to the response and don't shape your strategy or think that your strategy from even 6 months ago, let alone a year ago, is current. Always be ready to be nimble and flex it because these are different times.
Yeah, and great points, both Karen and Craig. But the only thing I'll add to that, to keep this brief, is that again, besides the surveying and the assessments that are done on an annual basis, one of the largest costs as part of that $1 billion plus annual spend on engagement is a lot of reward systems and platforms that are instituted by, and most of the time through larger enterprise organizations, where like the points or perks program gift cards and things of that nature. And I saw that firsthand in my previous life, working for one of the largest in that industry in the engagement space with that, is that it doesn't drive sustainable behavior change. People love to get stuff. Don't get me wrong. I have a stuff all over my house that I got for programs, but did I change my behavior to get that? It's no. And it's very short term. And it's more transactional, right? So what we're seeing, and I was just actually on a panel yesterday, not bragging I'm on a panel tour here, but there's a new new platform that's taking, well, not just the one, but the kind of concept of this is more lifestyle and benefits rewards, where, things, I mean, like you mentioned, some of the things that have been done for like relocation services, but other things like, food delivery in the pandemic, that's been a huge thing because people are, don't want to cook or whatever. So food delivery, but online tutoring for students, pet care and things like, so all those factors that kind of tie in more, when I talk about intrinsic before, more of those inherent motivators that are more sustainable and that are kind of baked in our core DNA, the things that get you up in the morning, so to speak. The trend towards more of those, lifestyle benefits, things that can help not only, the person at work that gets a, the clock on their desk, but it's helping their family and helping, the whole, again, more of a systemic, long-term solution. So, and again, it's not just those type of platforms. Companies can offer them through their, through just internal benefits, but paying attention to their employees, doing, doing surveys to see what is important to them. Instead of being tone deaf, where you're sending hats where they can't even afford to pay their kids tuition right now or something. So that's what I. But Craig and Karen, great points on that issue.
Yeah, no, I appreciate all of your perspectives. And before I move on to my next question, I will say, you give me a free thermos, I'll do just about anything. You can never have enough thermoses. All right. Let's address the elephant in the room, COVID. What should the folks on this webinar, participating in this event, what should we all be thinking differently about the employee experience in the age of COVID when so many people are working remotely? In other words, how does the construct change? How do we need to think a little differently about it when we don't have the luxury of the in-person relationships and contact, around which it sounds like the employee experience, in a significant way is sort of based on being able to kind of be in the same space with each other, right? To a certain extent. So I'll direct that question to Karen, and then gentlemen can jump in as you wish.
Sure. And, there's probably nothing that I would say that is going to be earth-shatteringly like, oh, write that down, that's genius, because I think that tomorrow is such a different day than today, where we talk about COVID and what to expect. And I think that's sort of the underlying tone, and I touched on this earlier. You have to be flexible. You have to basically, I won't say shred the annual goals or objectives, because I don't want to be that radical, but you really have to think more short-term greatness than and keeping the idea that you don't want to compromise your organization or your mission or your strategic plan to the point where you've compromised it, that would hurt your capability to fulfill your long-term requirements. But I do think that there's more of a short-term vision, a short-term scope. Not so much with blinders on, actually the opposite. I think you need to keep looking around you every day, but don't try to people want to know where they're going next. Right now, it's so important that they understand, here's a plan. It's like an AT, or it's like a GPS. When you block it, when you put in your address, your coordinates, that's your goal. You know where you want to go. And some of you may say, I'm going to take a different route, or you get surprised because there's an accident or what have you. But the reality is that what's most important is, where's my next turn? What is my next step? And I think so many times in what I'm seeing, and I've been guilty of this myself, full disclosure, I'm so worried about the end goal, end game, end metric, that right now during COVID, I need to take a step back, just take a step forward with the team and walk with them. virtually right now. And those short little check-ins, not so much micromanaging, but the little, whether it's a daily e-huddle or whatever works for you, it's a weekly 15 minutes. Try to keep those commitments. Don't cancel them. Don't be unreliable on the basics. And I think you'll help with engaging and enduring and hearing your employees and hearing your clients or your customers. Same advice applies. Stop worrying about the long-term commitment and big picture. You'll get that if they aren't tripping over themselves or second guessing what the path forward is. Just keep them moving forward.
Thanks, Karen. Craig, how have you had to pivot? You and your team have to pivot in light of what's come about here.
This is one of the things I feel like I could go on for a couple hours or give you a couple good minutes here, but it's funny. So my team's a corporate team. So we are all working remotely. I have not seen physically some of them since March. I saw a couple people because I had to come in and do some work in the city, and we caught up in a big conference room. So that's been the biggest thing for us. That's the funny story I can recall a couple years ago. I have a house in Ocean City, and I was here working like on a half day, ran here to kind of get ahead of traffic, and I'm working on my laptop, and like one of my kids left the trash can lid off. So there was a seagull in my back, and people are like, "Where are you, Craig? What is that sound?" Well, are you? And I'm like, I was so embarrassed that I was working from home, although I was working. And I think we've changed so much of that nowadays, so I think we're no longer, apologizing if the dog barked or that, or that the doorbell rings in the middle of a meeting. Sometimes I think we've given ourselves the grace, I think, to say that people are still working in different ways. I have colleagues that have children that they've had to adjust their schedules, and I think their bosses and me have been flexible within the rights of getting the work done, saying, right, if you want to get up at 5 and work 5 to 8 and then take off from 8 to 10, that's not take off, but you know what I mean? Like in terms of being more flexible.
Sure.
I think that's helpful. When this all was new, I would text one of my team and I'm like, "Hi, can you talk?" And they would write back and say, "Sure." And then I would call them. So I'm going a little bit on the other side. That I'm a little bit more like I'm on Microsoft Teams all day long. I will dial their number. I'm like, "Hey, how are you?" Good. And I probably am asking less permission during the workday, but it's okay if they're not there. They can write back and say it's not good. But I think part of what I wouldn't, in my office, I wouldn't text somebody and say, "Hey, can I come over to your office right now and talk to you? Is it a good time?" I would walk by and see if they were there.
Sure.
So,
all right. We'll see if
it's called a pregnant pause, Mike.
Yeah, Craig's really taking his time to think through this question.
Yeah.
I'm sure what he said was brilliant. I really give him credit.
Yeah, no, I hope we didn't lose him permanently. We'll see if he's able to rebound back. But as we wait for Craig to reconnect, Matt, let me ask you, given with your vantage point from where you at, what should companies and in particular the folks on this call who are entrepreneurial, running their own businesses, probably small to medium-sized businesses, what should they be thinking about, or what should we be thinking about with regard to our 2021 employee experience strategy? What should be top of mind for us as we look ahead?
Sure, and this kind of piggybacks on the last question a little bit here, is that one of the things that I've seen through the last 8 months that parallels a lot of what kind of we all saw, me personally through a lens and working in the engagement space back in 2008 during the recession period, 2008 to probably 2010 or 11, was that what you find taking out the companies that are financially hit by this, where budgets are constrained, furloughs and layoffs, right? But what that did in 2008 and now, it gave this I don't know what to call it, tacit permission for other organizations to put a hold and a halt on measuring, name it, whether it's motivation, engagement, all these things, and spending money on their employees, because they keep taking the tack that this is going to be a short-term issue, right? And so I remember, during the early part of COVID, companies were afraid to measure engagement, motivation, or whatever, because of the fact they thought, well, this is just a blip and we don't want to look bad. Well, this is like having a couple cheat days and not weighing yourself and pretend it's not there, right? And you know, if you're on a diet, it's like, if you know, it's a good, bad, and the ugly about things. If you don't measure what people are going through during an odd time, and this is a very odd time here, and I understand that there are table stakes things. You know, if you look at Maslow hierarchy, when you're looking at safety, security, health, you know, those factors. I mean, I wrote a article early on in the COVID crisis that you have to take care of those. That is, you know, they are the core elements before you can even, you know, evolve up that pyramid to get to things, you know, all the way up to self-actualization, and, you know, which would be the equivalent of engagement and all those factors. But if you don't measure it, it's impossible to know, well, what are our people going through? And you can make the assumptions that, oh, well, we have Slack or Microsoft Teams. Well, that's collaboration. You know, oh, well, now our people, they've always asked to work from home. Well, now they have autonomy. But, you know, autonomy in the sense of the definition really is self-management. It's not, you know, being let loose and not having any direction or guardrails about, you know, goals and things, expectations. It's about, you know, it's about having the ability to, you know, choose who you work with, when you work, all those other factors. But if you don't know what the heck you're supposed to do, you know, it becomes that you lose that sense of purpose, and it, you know, become kind of that deer in headlights about what am I doing? And then you don't feel good about yourself. I mean, I know when I have a good productive day, meetings, conversations, whatever, I certainly feel better at the end of the day. When I'm in that mode where you have inertia that sets in, I'm like, what do I do now? You know, you feel kind of crappy about yourself. So I just think it's one of those things where you know, companies can't ignore whether they're going to get bad results or not, and it's going to, you know, affect their, you know, their engagement scores or whatever. Can't worry about that. Mm-hmm. You have to do it and address it, and you know, look at the here and now, because you're going to have, you know, just like COVID, when you have the high number of cases and it's 3 weeks later that you have the repercussions from that. It's now that's happening. We're going to have the repercussions of people saying, you know, when things button up, hopefully sooner than later, they have the resume together and they're looking. You want to be proactive and make sure that you're addressing what's important now in a weird situation, you know, and regardless whether that's COVID or something happens during, you know, a merger or a financial crisis or whatever that is. It just, you can't ignore it. You need to, you know, address it straight on and have transparency.
That's a really good point. Karen, did you want to share a little bit about your thoughts?
I want to just throw in a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, Matt, excellent points. And I see Craig's back, so I don't want to, if he wants to finish his thoughts in a minute. I know you were being brilliant. That's what I told the group, and we will benefit from hearing what you were thinking. But I wanted to
hear the fate of the seagull. What happened to the seagull?
That's right.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like, I remember, like, my kids were probably like in college then, and I'm like, go cover the trash can. People know I'm at the shore. You know, it's just so funny how you had to like hide the fact that you were working remotely. You know, I was on a call with a headset on, right? So, yeah.
Well, welcome back, Craig. Nice to see you back.
Yeah.
Karen, you were saying?
I was just going to say that, you know, I talked about being the human and human resources. You really need to, as a leader, have opportunities to, or a consultant, to be able to be real and share your story, the good, the bad, you know, maybe not so much the ugly, but being able to say, yes, I'm showing up, I'm enthusiastic. We all are dealing with stuff. But the reality is that you may need to reinvent yourself. And I think that the one thing that I was excited about in our own organization that I'm in is that we overhauled, we happen to use Workday, doesn't matter what you use, but we created our own version of a job description system for projects. And we just put random projects that people needed done that either weren't getting done or we thought the right skills for because of the group that was in front of us. And it turns out we were able to repurpose some people in new and exciting ways that would never have heard of that opportunity, never would have thought to apply for it. But through this project initiative and setup, it was almost like we had our own internal consulting group that were able to flex and leverage and try new things out. And what we learned was potentially the bias or just the lack of access that used to be because you know it was either you were physically in person or it was just my immediate team, was how I thought about or how others thought about what skill sets we bring to the table. So I think it's really important, whether it's a consulting relationship or it's an employee relationship, that you are looking and updating your inventory. Whatever tool you use isn't as important to me as that you're doing something to give people access and opportunities. Don't assume that you don't have it. Don't assume that they aren't interested in it. Get rid of those assumptions and let people represent themselves in a new way. And then you have to build the confidence in them to do so. So when I talk about being human as a leader, talk about the fact I haven't always gotten it right the first time. When I started out in my journey, I never thought I'd be doing insights and advocacy. I thought I was just going to do training. And so to me, I think that's a pleasant surprise. And I want others to enjoy the joy of being pleasantly surprised. You can.
And
Excellent. Thank you.
real quick, Mike, just to quickly add to that, because I'm not sure if my answer really addressed the whole consultant kind of positioning for their clients for future. One of the things I think is really important, and in talking to a lot of organizations, large and small, is that the one size fits all solution set is going, the way of the dodo bird. I mean, to have that overarching solution that, I mean, again, I'm not talking about, having 25 LMSs in a system, but we're looking at things, like engagement and other factors, to be able to measure that quantifiably. It's one thing to hear from leadership, but a lot of times leadership is, like Karen mentioned earlier, it's from their lens. So what they feel like the rest of the organization should be doing, right? So just like I mentioned earlier, if they're a technology company or a life sciences company, that innovation is important to them. And so yes, the outside, the brand may project this very innovative solution or product that they have, but if the internal systems are antiquated and they have legacy platforms for things like med compliance systems or accounting or reimbursements, or they're not, the internal folks aren't getting that innovation feeling, right? And so the whole key to kind of brand success is having that employee experience align with the customer experience that perceives that brand. If they don't align, something's going to come out in the wash eventually, right? Whether that's employees leaving or not, feeling the love and not proselytizing, what their solution is or what their goals and missions are. So having just a voice from the C-suite to say, this is what we need to do. I think just to challenge a little bit and say, let's get in here and let's benchmark this. Let's get the litmus test of what's going up and take more of a bottom-up approach for what really is the core of what's going on in the organization, and then develop it from there. And it doesn't mean there's still not focus groups and certainly talking to leadership about things, but then coming back and saying, listen, hey, you were right about X and Y, but here at Z, we're showing that, this is really problematic and there's a big delta here we need to address. And so coming back with that and challenging leadership a little bit, I think is going to be really important, and providing those objective measures, the tying in with, again, the qualitative aspect of just the human touch. That doesn't go away. It just needs to be supplemented.
Excellent. And I think on that note, seems like a pretty appropriate place for at least my questions to conclude. Before we turn it over to the group, I'm sure they have some questions for you that I haven't addressed. So thank you very much, panelists, for a robust and thought-provoking conversation. I'm going to enlist the help of Zoe to pivot now to questions from the participants, whether they came through in chat or whether you would just like to direct a question to one of our panelists here in real time. Participants, the floor is yours for the next few minutes.
So I've got a question, actually. I think you hear a lot that the person's direct manager has a lot to do with whether they feel like the company is, good for them, if they feel engaged with. What do you do if you have a poor manager, maybe someone who's good at the technical aspects of their job, but not good at managing people, or they just don't really seem to click with their team? How do you manage that?
Did
I'm
you want?
happy to jump in.
Okay.
Michael, if you want to answer that first, since you've been doing mostly facilitating, that's up to you. You look like you might have something to say.
Oh,
So.
no, I was going to ask Zoe if she was directing that to a panelist in particular, but Karen, go for it.
Okay, great. I will tell you that, yes, it is something that I don't know if it's exactly the right percentage, but it's something like 2/3 of people leave organizations right now because of their managers. Much less right now because of the pandemic, but definitely at the beginning of this year, it was a driving factor. And interestingly enough, I was on a webinar yesterday through the HRO Today Association, and Peter Wharton, the director of the Wharton School of, I want to say it's business training, but he's a well-known speaker and thought leader on organizational development and what makes or breaks organizations. And one of the things his research showed was that we do a really poor job overall in the United States of looking at talent within, that we still are only promoting from within about 30% of our opportunities. And that to me is a direct correlation with how well does the manager know the employee, how well is the manager trained to be a leader. A lot of times when we do promote from within, it was usually a good, somebody who was really good at their job as a producer, independent contributor, and then all of a sudden they're a supervisor, much different world. So I would say that the big thing, if you're in a situation like that, and I'm not going to say I have it, but I will tell you that the first thing is in this day and age, what I call reasonable transparency and reasonable ask means that having a conversation about just concerns. Like I have concerns. I've noticed this response when I do things. I've noticed that I've been struggling with this project. I'm looking for X, Y, or Z. How do you see my performance? How do you see how our supervisor and employee relationship is going? Is there something I could be doing more or differently to communicate with you so that I can get in return X, Y, or Z type of feedback or X, Y, Z results? Or, is there an opportunity for me to maybe transition to something new? I'm looking for something different so that you don't give up on the organization and that you don't have to become just running to HR to tell them I have a manager problem. Like, that's okay to do, but there are other ways you can approach it, but you have to have a little bit of courage. And so in many companies, there are employee resource programs or things so you can talk this out. And I even offer, I'm an independent coach. If somebody wants to have a 15-minute conversation, I'm always open to it.
Thank you, Karen.
I can just add real quick. So Zoe, one of the things, through the work we do at Cravity, so the intrinsic motivation assessment tool, when we provide that to organizations, again, we can kind of parse the data by, job title, manager, all the different, factors there. And the one key thing about looking at motivation, there's no wrong answer, right? Whether you're motivated through teamwork and collaboration or innovation or learning, those type of factors. But one of the things that it does in an organization, when a manager sees that, there are 12 direct employees, that there's a huge gap in autonomy. Their people want autonomy, but the manager, so say, we use a Likert scale. So 1 to 5, their employees are at a 4.5 for what they desire in autonomy. That manager's at a 2, that's and there's individual reports as well that they can look at. But what that does is it creates a more less punitive and less, I wouldn't say direct, but it's not a slap in the face as much to a manager. If you came up to a manager or sat down and said, listen, you micromanage the living daylights out of me, and usually those conversations that, if a manager would ask that question, say, oh no, you're fine. It's, I love the 3-hour commute each way that I'm not working from home ever. But what it does is it opens up the dialogue, and that's a key thing. It's all about that. And so when a manager sees that, it's hard to ignore, and it's hard for the organization to ignore as well. And again, companies haven't used it as any punitive, but from a standpoint of coaching or soft skills development for things, if there's gaps in autonomy or teamwork or whatever that motivation is that we're seeing. the desire not being met by the organization or the manager, only then can they really lean in. If not, it's just anecdotal, he said, she said. But the other factor is that, in the reporting, we also provide, based on their motivations, action steps and recommendations to the individual to lean into those things too, because even though the organization, the manager have the most resources, it's still one of those things where if, you wanted to go to an outside seminar that costs $2,000, well, okay, write up an executive summary, what that can mean to you and your team and your group. Don't just mention to your manager in passing at the coffee station, right? So there is some professionalism and accountability that need to be taken by us as the employees that can, and hey, that might not work either, but at least you've given it the proverbial college try to put something organized together. So there are a lot of factors like that you can have a difference. It may be, again, 2/3 the organization, the manager, and 1/3 you, but if it's something that's important to you, try to build it up, and because just look at it like your personal brand. If it's not for the organization, make it for yourself. And I'm not saying from a selfish way, but I mean, if you feel like the heavy lifting is too much there, at least try it for yourself in order to, whether you're moving up in the organization or moving out to a different career or path.
Yeah, it sounds
Mike,
like. Yeah, of course, Craig. Go.
Can I just add? I think Zoe raised a really important point. I remember a survey, I think it was Huffington Post, and it said 3 out of 4 folks are saying that the boss is the worst and most stressful part of the job, and 2/3 would rather have a new boss than a pay raise. I mean, so it's it's phenomenal how strong that impact is, and it's a hard one to solve. And I think, employees need to step up, but we need to get our managers better trained and more aware of the negative impact they're having on their staff.
Absolutely.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you, Zoe and panelists, for your thoughtful responses. What other questions do you have?
We've got one in the chat here from Wendy. Any additional thoughts or suggestions on improving or turning around low engagement in an organization that is struggling in our current COVID world? For example, unpaid furloughs of some, staffing reductions in some areas, et cetera.
Craig, you have some thoughts on that one?
You're going to call on me, Mike, on that one. It's tough. I mean, it's tough.
Look,
right?
he's buffering.
Exactly. So, and it's funny, and I'll offer that we have not, had any reductions yet. But I've been at a time when we did have reductions and things were unsure. This probably sounds very elementary, but I think nothing beats a one-on-one conversation with your boss in terms of providing a transparent snapshot of what's happening. So if there is some instability in the organization, being clear about what, as much as as possible, what would a furlough look like and how much time away that might be. I think giving somebody permission if the economy is kind of funky now, right? So we've got some places that are still hiring. So I think if somebody, is exceedingly loyal to the organization, but you can't give them an idea of when their return might be, the permission to look for a new job, I think is something that would be good to show that you care about the employee as a person. Hopefully things turn around. But I think depending upon size and scope, is being able to work individually with employees. Sometimes I think the corporate communication when things come here, that's seen as kind of just, the CEO speak around things. We love our communication from our CEO, but it's not. I try to take that and translate that to the employee. Like, here's what that means for us. My recommendation would be keep the conversation open and honest.
Yeah. If I could add, there's something that I'm in a group. My leader has started that she calls it a power hour of gratitude, and it's really an opportunity for the extended team, and others can join if they ask. Right, they can't just join, but if they ask, they're allowed in. But it's an opportunity to share resources. Talk about experiences. It's not meant to necessarily be hardcore work. Yeah, we cover some updates, but it's really about recognizing other employees who've helped each other with any type of issue during this pandemic. And who are you grateful for? What are you grateful for? What are you struggling with? And the reason why this permission is because, we want to make sure people understand you can trust this group that, unless something is horribly disparaging, which we don't anticipate, or vulnerable, which then we would ask them to go in person to somebody. But overall, it's been really exciting to hear about people helping each other, whether it's just tips and tricks to who's doing online yoga, what's a good course for that to alleviate stress, to, hey, here's a good food delivery. We talked about that. I think, Matt, you said something about that. But it's not all hardcore work related, and it builds that engagement, that caring spirit, and the leader is driving it. And then she will shout out to somebody who's helped her that week, and she's real about it. And I thought that was, it may not work for everybody, but I know in our case, it's definitely helped us set aside a little bit of time that feels both self-empowering as well as helpful and selfless.
I think Tricia wanted to make a comment.
Sure.
Well, I just wanted to spend a little bit of a time here to really thank Karen and Craig and Matt for your time today. As the chair of the Human Capital subcommittee for this group, I'm really very appreciative of helping us to close out our year with a bang. Mike, I think you've done an amazing job today. Thank you so much for taking this on and really driving this to come about. We're all stressed right now with lots of work or things that are getting in the way of us being able to be, have all kinds of things on our plate. And Matt, Mike, when I asked him to, really stepped up to the plate to make this happen for our closeout this year. So thank you again to you, Mike. And again, Karen, Craig, and Matt, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a real joy, and I've been fascinated with this conversation. I have my own personal opinions about employee engagement, but all of them are supplemented by your thoughts and comments. So thank you again. I think we all should give a round of a virtual applause right now to everybody. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thanks, Zoe.
Thanks, Tricia. Mike, I think we have one more question in the chat
Yeah.
here.
Sure. And let me just echo Tricia's comments. Well, I'll have more formal thank yous momentarily. So why don't we finish up with that question, Zoe?
Okay, great. So it was mentioned that the time between offer letter and first day is critical for new employee engagement. What are some wow gestures or actions during this time period, as well as the first few days, that you could suggest?
I'm really passionate about this one. I will tell you that onboarding to me is the make or break situation for anybody, because it really sets the first impression. I think there was a comment in here about being on calls and people showing up in sweatpants and not making a great impression. Well, think of your onboarding as your company showing up in sweatpants to greet your new employee and not having the right resources or not having answers to questions to help you succeed. And so don't be that. Don't do that. And so I think the key thing is a couple of things is that have a mapping concept. When I remember that GPS scenario I talked to you about, what really employees want to know in their first few weeks is not so much hold my hand, but what are the resources that are critical for me to get my virtual arms around, probably, and who do I need to know, right? Like, who do I need to reach out to? Who is the 15-minute conversation? Who's the half an hour conversation? Who's the hour conversation? And who am I trying to emulate, if anyone, right now? You can send a care kit. Again, I don't want to contradict what we said earlier. It really isn't just about a service, but sometimes when you're new, it might be, right? Like getting used to the brand and getting used to the opportunity. Something with the brand on it really says you're home. But more importantly, do you have the equipment set up? Like, I think that to me was the one thing about my current company I was very impressed with, was that I had my equipment 2 days before start. Now, we didn't turn it on till the first day, but I knew I had my stuff ready to go. And I think especially virtually right now, that's so critical. And then the manager needs to be a critical part of the process. Don't start an employee and not expecting to be there for at least the first week to 2 weeks in what I call really accessible ways.
And I think the other key thing, in doing some work with organizations, previously and recently, when doing design thinking sessions based on some results and everything, when it comes to the onboarding portion, which again is critical, what I think is a miss a lot of times, it's not that the resources aren't there in some form or fashion, but it's the fact that going back to the frontline manager, if they're not, and this goes the same, it's very parallel to incentive compensation. I've done a ton of research in that area where if they don't understand the plan, or in this case, all the elements that go into a successful onboarding process that include the training, development, and all the tools and resources needed, they're not going to communicate it, because no one wants to feel or be put in a position that they are inadequate. And so I think all organizations really need to make sure that managers, at that people manager level, need to understand exactly what is part of that. And then a manager could be there for 25 years, and the onboarding process could have changed 16 times. And it might be just assumed that because that person, should be privy to all the cultural artifacts that are in the organization, that they would know what's going on. They may be 15 levels or 15 iterations behind what they thought was going on with what's on board. So that's critical. If they understand it intimately and innately, they can then have those conversations and be able to address things. Something as simple as tuition reimbursement. You've had employees that on their exit interviews say, well, I was looking for, having futuring education, but there's no reimbursement policy. Well, yeah, we have a reimbursement. Well, they didn't know. So perception's reality, whether it's there or not, if the employees don't know about it, that's a big miss. So
I'll throw in two things, Matt.
Sure,
Matt will
thanks.
fit in perfectly in there as well. Two simple techniques that just over the period of my career I've been able to do is one is, once an offer has been accepted by somebody, my team's 35 people, not all report to me, obviously, but and when someone accepts an offer, we send an email out to the team and saying, Matt Johnson's taken our offer. He's going to be our new change consultant. Here's his email address. And for the most part, everyone writes a quick welcome to the team. Here's who I am. I'll be working with you in this part. So that's the simple part. We also assign a peer mentor who is not on the same team, who helps you, to that point, Matt, navigate questions like, I don't get it, or how do you use tuition, or, I'm having trouble navigating this part of the organization. So somebody who can kind of help them address organizational culture, who is a safe person to talk to, and we provide for them a little bit of guidance on how to manage that. And we also provide not a budget, but like, it's okay to take a person to lunch and expense it. Back when you could have lunch, right?
So would it be the case that the principles that the three of you are sharing would also apply to a business of 10 employees as well as a business of 5,000 employees?
Absolutely. I would
Scaled,
say,
yeah. Yeah.
I've never worked in a really small place other than, in odd jobs in high school and stuff, but I have friends that have small businesses that probably would say it's even more important, because sometimes there's not as much formal structure about how this place works. So it's kind of like there's maybe not an employee manual. There's not really a set of values or mission. So it's even more important to say, here's how things work here.
Yeah, sure. No, that's exactly what I've seen with the kind of that small marketplace where, they may think they know their people, but especially when it's remote now, to understand the needs, the day-to-day needs is now, tougher than ever, obviously, but.
Zoe?
I don't know if you want to wrap up or you want to we have one more question.
Okay.
And then maybe we'll just do one breakout networking instead of two.
Sure.
Get to the question. So this is from Maria. As we offboard employees due to RIF, how do you measure that this is done correctly?
So the question was, as we offboard employees due to RIF, how do you measure that this is being done correctly?
Yes.
Go ahead. Craig, did you?
Craig, did you
Oh,
want to?
okay.
I'll
Oh,
give it
okay.
to Karen.
Okay. I have, okay. Sometimes if I breathe, I see the thing come on and I'm going,
I know
oh,
that's
hi.
what confused.
So
I think Craig
have
inhaled.
basically-
I think Craig inhaled, so his window lit up. So I thought. So it's very sensitive. This Zoom, very sensitive. So yeah,
All
Karen,
right. So
go ahead.
that's right. It's just three points there. And it may not be this cookie cutter, but I like to think about it in three buckets. The first is with a reduction in force. Is it performance related? From a measurement standpoint, I think you want to look at, if it's truly due because of budget or something like that, that it might be something different. But I think that you have to look at what are your I hate to say the term weakest link because that's not always true, but what are the areas where you're underperforming or you no longer value as a performance as much as maybe there's other new areas or opportunities where you have to reinvest resources. So I think you need to look at those performance metrics when you're making those decisions and be able to say either we're taking a hit or we're going to stop measuring those because we found new opportunities to measure and new ways to say what success looks like. I think the next is from a productivity perspective, you need to think about, and these kind of tie hand in hand, but who are really showing up? Who are really showing up as far as your performers from a metrics, from a performance review standpoint, from engagement standpoint? What areas of the business are really showing great productivity or are showing high amounts of absenteeism, high amounts of maybe it's employee relations issues or potentially issues with satisfaction. And I think that when you look at from all of that, you can say, all right, can we move the needle and see if any changes that we're making will improve upon this in the long run? So you want to start with baseline before you get too deep into it, and then you want to circle back just to see if there's been any difference that you need to track. And then finally, I would say from a price perspective, are you really saving money in the end or cutting costs where you have to as a hard reality? What is the investment in that employee been? Are you cutting people? Are you really cutting? Like, are you giving early retirement? Are you giving severance packages if you're capable of doing that in a way? Because in the end, you need to reinvest resources, or you need to say we just don't have that money to spend, but we can incur this loss shorthand because again, they're in areas where we're not going to leverage in the long run. But I would just caution that whatever you decide in a reduction in force, we know it's not easy, and we know that there will be people there that will be scared about or upset about or angry about the fact that they're still there doing either more work or different work. You really need to figure out ways to boost and communicate with those that remain and maybe offer more to them. It might be that you're saving a little bit less, but in the long run, you're going to save a lot more with retention of the talent that you really want.
Excellent. Thank you, Karen. All right. Well, what a fabulous conversation. I want to echo Trisha's earlier comments and thank our three panelists profusely for their expertise, their time, and the preparation that they so clearly made so that this event would be a successful one. So thank you to the three of you. It's been a pleasure reconnecting with the three of you and having our discussions around what this might look like. And you all acquitted yourselves fabulously. So thank you very much for that. Zoe, thank you for your assistance today. Really appreciate your production work here. Not my forte. And knowing that you were there to assist was a relief. So if you need to head off, we completely understand. I want to thank you for being a part of the event today. If you can hang on for 5-10 more minutes as Zoe puts us into networking pods, breakout rooms, what have you, that would be wonderful as well. So that's what we're going to do for the next few minutes. And
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.